That, oh, awesome. Perfect. Well, thank you all for joining us today and welcome to today's webinar, Supporting Young Adults with Serious Mental Health Conditions in Post-Secondary Education. We're going to go ahead and get started because we have a really great session jam-packed for you today. My name is Jackie Zimmerman. I'm the Public Education Associate at Mental Health America's National Office, and I will be moderating today's webinar. I have a few notes for you all before I introduce our presenters. This webinar is being recorded and will be emailed out to all the registrants within 1 week. We currently do not offer CEUs, but if you would like to request a certificate of attendance, we do have a form that you can fill out to request one of those. I'll post that link to the certificate request form in the chat here shortly, and then that'll also go out in your follow-up email along with the recording. We hope to have a little bit of time at the end for some Q&A. So as we're going today, please feel free to add your questions in the chat. We will be collecting those and going through some of those at the end of the presentation. And also feel free to utilize the chat throughout the presentation to connect with others, share your own knowledge, and ask those questions for us to go through. And now I'm excited to introduce our speakers for today. Our first speaker is Catherine Sabella. Catherine is an assistant professor within the Transitions to Adulthood Center for Research at the Implementation Science and Practice Advances Research Center within the Department of Psychiatry at UMass Chan Medical School. Her research aims to create new knowledge and understanding about the needs and experiences of young adults with serious mental health conditions, and apply that knowledge to the development, testing, and implementation of age-appropriate and culturally appealing evidence-based practices that can improve the lives of young adults. Welcome, Catherine. We also today have with us Alexis Yume, who identifies as a young adult with lived experience of navigating college while managing mental health challenges. Alexis graduated from Boston University in May 2022 and recently joined the Brookline Center of Community Mental Health as a district and school support specialist. She also interns as an in-home therapist for youth at the Italian Home for Children and is very passionate about providing school-based interventions for children with mental health challenges. Welcome, Alexis. We are so excited to have both of you with us today and ready for this wealth of knowledge you are going to share. So, Catherine, I will hand it over to you and let you take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Jackie. And thank you to MHA for supporting this webinar. And I'm so happy to see so many people joining us today from all over the place. I think I'm most jealous of those folks calling in from Hawaii, but I'll let that go for now. So today, I also want to just acknowledge a couple other partners that contributed to putting this webinar together today. So 2 centers that I'm affiliated with. The first is at the University of Illinois, Chicago, where Judith Cook is the director of a rehabilitation and research and training center on the health and function of people with serious mental illness. And that's a grant funded through NIDLR. And I'm also here representing my home center, the Transitions to Adulthood Center for Research, which also includes funding from NIDLR and others to improve services and supports for young adults with serious mental health conditions. So today I'm going to try to get through a lot. So as you know, we're about starting a new school year for many young adults who are either beginning their college careers or returning to their college careers. And we really will be focusing on that post-secondary education pathway. But I do acknowledge that college is not for everyone. And I would strongly encourage folks working with young adults with serious mental health conditions to recognize that there are other pathways to success in early adulthood. But today we really will focus on, I want to provide you a bit of a developmental, social, cultural context for young adulthood and what makes young adults so unique. Talk a little bit about what we know about mental health conditions in young adulthood and in higher education. And then I really want to spend the bulk of the time sharing experiences of young adult college students with mental health challenges in post-secondary education settings. And Alexis is going to share a little bit of her experience as well. And then I'll try to wrap it up in a way that kind of really drives home the major implications that I want people to be able to take away from today, and also provide a few resources. So with that, let's get started. So at the most basic sense, when I talk about young adulthood, the most broad range is typically ages 16 to 25. I mean, 14 to 30, but then we usually narrow that in on 16 to 25. Just like any other milestone of age, it's always kind of a moving target, and age really is just a number. But in our society, when we talk about, in my research, when we talk about young adults, we're really focusing in on that age of 16, late adolescence, into about 25, early adulthood. So let's talk about what makes young adulthood so unique, which is both in terms of individual development, but also the social cultural context of young adulthood. So here's what we talk about in young adulthood as the big brain remodel, right? And so in early childhood, our brain goes through a very rapid period of development. And the only period of development that even comes close to matching that rapid period of early development is in young adulthood, particularly within the prefrontal cortex, which is where the part of our brain that handles logic, empathy, creativity, self-regulation, self-awareness, planning, problem solving, attention. There is so much change and growth in that prefrontal cortex that this is really what sets aside children from adults. And if you have been a teenager or a young adult, or have parented them recently, this is usually the part of the brain that you just can't understand, like, what were you thinking? That kind of question that comes up is usually they're thinking something different. Their brain literally is at a different rate of space of development than older, more mature adults. And most young adults will have achieved cognitive brain development maturity. There are many ways to measure maturity, but cognitive development maturity by age 26, but it's not a guarantee. Some will take longer. Some will finish that brain development sooner. And unfortunately, we don't really get to go in and see where somebody's prefrontal cortex is at. So I think this is where we have to show some patience for their developing brains. And cognitive development is important for so many parts, but specifically for executive functioning, or the skills that we clump together as executive functioning. This is everything from how to think more abstractly, how to think more hypothetically. If I do this, then this will happen. This includes the increasing ability for insight, foresight, but also really concrete skills like organizing, planning, time management, task management. All those things are really dependent on our cognitive maturation and practice. And so that's something that's really important to keep in mind. But basically, we know that in between adolescents and adults are a lot of changes, but really between ages 17, 18, and 26 are when these major shifts in cognitive and psychological development are happening. But wait, there's more. Young adults have a lot going on. They are developing new sense of their own morals and ethics and values. They're learning and navigating their own sense of what is right and what is wrong. They are navigating new social and social sexual relationships. This is the typical time for gender and sexual identity exploration and experimentation, which is age normative as these young people are trying to figure out who they are. That big question of identity. This is the first kind of identity crisis that you're kind of aware of as an individual, as a young person on the precipice of adulthood. And there are a lot of family changes often happening, and those take many shapes and sizes, and I won't get into all that. That's a whole separate webinar, but taken together, these developmental areas are going to underlie one's ability to function as an adult, whatever that is expected to look like. But again, age is nothing but a number, and I think that's really important. We have a society that is marketed by child and adult, and age to buy cigarettes and not, legal age to vote, enlist in the reserves, things like that. But we have to remember that age is an objective demographic, and it is used subjectively over time and in different cultures and societies. So importantly here, there's a historical context that I'll get into a little bit because humans evolve, but so do societies. But it's also important to remember that there's no such thing as a typical quote unquote young adult. It is not one size fits all. And when we use generational labels like you know, millennials and Generation X and Generation Y, we're really foster stereotyping and other negative attributes to a group of people that honestly probably don't have a lot in common. We know that determinants of class, gender, race, and geography are much more influential on what young adulthood looks like or how young adults present themselves in the world. And again, there's this historical context where the biological cognitive development maybe hasn't changed really. We're always evolving, but in the last 100 years, maybe it hasn't changed that much. However, the world is changing in many, many ways. So this is where I'm a sociologist, and this is where I come in with reminding everybody that there's this new-ish extended young adulthood or emerging young adulthood period where we are seeing drastic changes in the last 70 years or so in what is expected and what is a timeline to achieving adult, quote unquote, normative milestones. So rates of marriage are decreasing among individuals at every age, but especially among young adults. And rates of independent living are decreasing, meaning more young adults are living at home for longer periods of time, even pre-pandemic, okay? At the same time, if they're getting marriage, that age of marriage, they're putting that off. We're really seeing young people delaying marriage if they decide to get married at all, and similarly delaying childbirth, age at first childbirth. And even if you just look at some of the data between, 2016 and 1980, when I was born, like the drastic changes in the age of first childbirth among both men and women. And more people are cohabitating, more people are forming romantic partnerships and household partnerships outside of marriage. And we're also seeing huge increased rates of college enrollment. And that's what we're really here to talk about today. But before we get into that a little bit, I think it's really important to remind everybody that youth have always had their own subculture. So no matter what quote unquote generation you belong to, on where you come from or what era you grew up in, there was a youth subculture that the older generation did not understand, and that remains true today. And areas of youth subculture that are really important to keep in mind are the ways young people communicate with each other, the way they communicate with their elders, with professionals, with doctors and things like that. The ways in which they influence each other in terms of what's trendy, what is a status symbol, what is the latest, greatest drug, alcohol, kind of, stimulant, what's happening, what's being passed around at the parties, those kinds of things. And we see bullying. We see some of these really difficult interpersonal things happening. We've got TikTok, we've got all the new things. And I want to just remind folks of this because I think if you are a provider who works with primarily young adults in some capacity, and you do that for a career span of 30 or 40 years, you've got to continually keep an eye on what that youth subculture is and how it's evolving over time. I've been doing this work for 12 years, and the number of new social media types and things like that, like it's ever changing. And if you want to be able to relate and support young people, you have to be cognizant of where they're coming from and the world that they're living in. And one area that I'm really fascinated with when it comes to talking to young adults is the evolving and diverse youth perceptions and experiences of mental health and mental illness. I love young adults. I think they are just always kind of challenging the rest of society to think of things in different ways. And when we look back on the last few years, young adults have really been at the forefront of some social justice movements, the LGBTQ movements and gender identity, gender exploration, and also in, I'll say, destigmatizing conversations around mental health. There is still a lot of stigma attached to having a quote unquote serious mental health condition. Don't get me wrong, but celebrities and others coming forward, sharing and normalizing mental health challenges as a normative way of life is eons from where we were 30, 40, 50 years ago, where if you were struggling with your mental health, you did not tell anybody. So I think this is a really important point to make as well. And I could not stand here and tell you all about education and young adults without tipping my hat to the pandemic. And we saw so many subgroups of people uniquely impacted by the COVID pandemic, but we know that young adults really took the brunt of some of this when it comes to experiences, especially in the spring and fall of 2020. And again, this is going to look different for many different subgroups. It's not one size fits all, but the long-term impacts of the interruptions that were experienced by many young adults, or the most young adults during these past few years, we don't know what that's going to look like to their long-term kind of career trajectories, the economic impacts. I mean, we're still in it, let's be real. So the other contextual piece that is important to remember is, I alluded to this before, rates of college education and enrollment are increasing. And what we've seen over the last 30, 40, 50 years in terms of economics is that traditional manufacturing, blue collar jobs, sectors of the economy are shrinking. And these more sophisticated IT kind of sectors are increasing. A high school diploma 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago was good enough for many, many folks to go on to lead very economic, self-sufficient lives. But that's no longer the case. And increasingly, we're also seeing any kind of high school equivalency degree as having decreasing societal and economic value. So what that means is that young people more and more need a post-secondary degree to get further in their economic and career trajectory. We know that from data, there's a citation here from 2005, but the Bureau of Labor Statistics illustrates this repeatedly year after year, that for each additional year of education one person obtains, they on average are going to experience a 9% increase in lifetime earnings. So there are benefits to moving forward in trying to obtain this degree, but it doesn't mean it's always easy, and it doesn't mean it's always for everybody. So I do want to make that clear. And post-secondary education costs are rising and student debt is crippling. So you have more people going to school and more people taking out student loans and more people paying off those loans for longer and longer periods of time. And so again, there's another economic context there that's really important. So getting into it a little bit more, we talk about mental health conditions in young adulthood and higher education. I'm going to share a few slides that just gives us a little of the data. Again, I was just kind of talking about why young adults, why is this a unique period? But then I want to layer that with why are young adults with mental health conditions of increasing concern? And we want to make sure we're supporting them. We know that the majority or 2/3 of mental illness or disorders occur prior to the age of 25. And we also know that the peak age of mental illness disorder onset is about 14, 15 years old. And for most first episodes of psychosis occur between ages 15 to 30. So this is happening. This is happening in that adolescent young adult period. This is oftentimes when young people are first being diagnosed with some serious mental health conditions. And looking here at some data from SAMHSA, when we look at 2019 data, so pre-pandemic, 18 to 25-year-olds, almost a third of 18 to 25-year-olds reported any mental illness, any meaning any kind and any severity, but they felt they identified as somebody with mental illness, compared to only 25% of 26 to 49-year-olds and 14% of 50-year-olds. And we also know that, again, this pattern exists when you talk to people and they identify as having a serious mental illness, which is more impaired functioning because of their mental health condition. And we see, again, the rates highest among young people ages 18 to 25 compared to older groups. The terrifying thing is that young adults also have the lowest rates of mental health service use by age group. And even before the pandemic, we were seeing staggering increases in the rates of serious mental illness and suicide, thoughts of suicide. So literally between 2008 and 2019, the rates of serious mental illness, again, the most impaired group among 18 to 25-year-olds doubled. And that chart is pretty much the same or very similar looking for the increase in young people claiming to have had serious thoughts of suicide in the past year, pre-pandemic. So when we look within college, because college has a lot of young adults, right? We see some of this data here showing that about 27% of US college students have a diagnosable mental health condition. And there's this study here that I'm citing from the Healthy Mind study, comparing data from the academic year of 2018 to 2019 to winter spring 2021. And you can see here increases in every category. More young adults reporting current severe depression, current moderate to severe anxiety, about a third of all students reporting that. Again, about a third reporting psychotropic medications in the past 12 months. Over half, 53%, endorse a current need for help for their mental health. I don't have the rates of help seeking here, but just remember a minute ago, I showed you that actually the number that actually are able to get that help is much lower. More than half are saying they have a need, and we know what the wait lists look like in this country right now for mental health support. And again, more than half reported 3 or more days in the past 4 weeks where their mental health hurt their academic performance. So this is happening, and it's having some repercussions here. Some other data from across various sources is that, again, first-year college students often have higher rates of serious mental health conditions or report higher rates. So this number is about 43%. That first year in college is a doozy, depending on what you're transitioning into. We know that college students with mental health conditions have high rates of college disruption. So I'll talk about this later, but this is really what we mean by that is needing to take a break or walk away from their education at any given time for whichever reason. And on the flip side, the data show that positive mental health or indicators of positive mental health are strongly correlated to academic success, academic retention, ultimately vocational success, adult resiliency, et cetera, et cetera. So we're worried about this group. We're worried that the prevalence of mental health conditions is so high in this group. And we know that positive mental health and indicators of positive mental health are indicators of success in many ways. So we need to find a way to intervene to support these individuals more. So I want to spend a good chunk of time here highlighting the experiences of young adults with mental health challenges in post-secondary settings. My research has been mostly, well, it's qualitative and quantitative, but I really want to get to hear from young people themselves in my research and hear what their experiences are, because otherwise, service design and delivery really is just kind of guessing. When I look at those low rates of help seeking, I can't help but think there's a disconnect between the ways that young people think about their own mental health and their mental health needs and the ways in which the service system is designed or deliver their services. So to that end, I'm going to just have Alexis make sure you're here and you're ready. You want to say hi?
Yes, hello.
Okay.
Hi, everybody.
So I know Jackie gave a full bio. So Alexis is here. She's going to share a little her experience in and out. I'm also going to bring in some quotes from some qualitative research that I've done and my colleagues have done as well. So Alexis, any thoughts real quick on anything I just presented? Anything you want to?
No, I definitely just second everything from lived experience. So I'm excited to kind of get into more of that now.
Great, thanks. All right, so I kind of touched on this already, but in our research and in just conducting our research, we again are seeing these trends of how young people talk about or experience what we would consider mental illness in young adulthood. So again, part of this is cultural in terms of where they're getting their information about what mental health and mental illness is. But we see that many young adults, when we're recruiting studies, research studies for young adults who have a diagnosis of mental health condition, I was shocked recently at how many young people are like, I don't know if I've ever been diagnosed. I see a therapist. Does that mean I have a mental health condition? He's never said what it is. I'm not sure. If they do know, they're often naming a bunch of diagnoses off. And it's not that these co-occurring mental health conditions, again, can't occur together, but many times what we're hearing from young people is like, well, at 16, I was doing some self-harm. I went to the ER, the doctor diagnosed me with this and gave me this medicine. And then a few years later, that wasn't working. So I went back to the ER and I saw a new doctor and they changed my diagnosis, and then they gave me this, you know, and so there's this in and out uncertainty about what diagnosis they have. And again, maybe some ambivalence about that diagnosis and about the field of psychiatry as well. Medication changes are frequent and disruptive, and many of us here may have experienced this in our own lives. And so when you have changing providers and changing diagnoses and changing medications, it is very disruptive to your ability to continue to pursue your daily activities, which might include getting up at 8 a.m. for your 8:30 class and getting there on time. And we're seeing inpatient hospitalizations is really very common still. You know, we had the deinstitutionalization movement of the 1960s. We see, you know, really an increase in outpatient mental health treatment for sure. But many, many young people are still experiencing inpatient hospitalizations, even if short, very disruptive to their lives and their ability to continue functioning and going to school. Speaking of ability to go to school, what we're seeing is, again, more diverse pathways through young adulthood and through post-secondary settings. So in talking to young adults in some qualitative research a few years ago, many of them endorsed the fact that they're like, I don't know why I went to college. I just did. That's what you did. You know, they don't really have clear educational aspirations. They weave in and out of college and work. Many will pursue classes cumulatively at more than one university. And so it's, you know, start here and then you take a semester off and then you go back here. And I got to tell you, those credits don't always transfer. And many young people don't know that they're not going to transfer. We see these academic disruptions again, these starts and stops. And the scariest part where it was how many students, young people reported this student debt from hindering them from going back to school. And in some cases, they were paying for credits they never even earned. So if you are in a college setting or have somebody in your family, you might know this add drop period, which is basically like at most the first 2 weeks of a semester, where if you drop a class after that first 2 weeks, 10 days, you still have to pay for those credits, even if you did not complete the class. And that is just a huge burden to bear. Again, we see low rates of help seeking on campus. And importantly, what I want to point out is that in our more recent research looking at interventions that improve executive functioning among college students with mental health conditions, I want to make it clear, these kids, they're smart. This is not an intelligence thing, okay? They're getting decent grades. They're getting 3.0s, 3.4s, 4.0s. It's something else, okay? And that's what we have to figure out is what else is it that we can help them with. So in talking to young people in my research, I've heard a lot about this barrier to success, meaning barriers to continued pursuit of education, what I've called stress-induced anxiety and panic. And this is situational, environmental. This is that feeling of I couldn't cope with this situation. This isn't necessarily a symptom of their mental health condition. It's their ability to cope with day-to-day life and stressors. This is sometimes anxiety in social situations or anxieties in problem solving. A young adult here again says, I have a 4.0 GPA. Content is not the issue. It's being on campus, just being around people, walking into a classroom that tends to be the biggest issue. Going to class, attendance, I think that will always be my biggest struggle. I work very hard to get the grades I get, but it's definitely managing the anxiety day to day. And when you're managing a mental health condition, you are going to have better days and worse days. And you are going to be changing medications and changing providers. And maybe you have found yourself in the hospital for a short stay. And managing a serious mental health condition can in and of itself be a full-time job. And symptoms, when they flare up and you don't have supports in place, or you actually need more intense supports, can be really disruptive to your ability to get that term paper finished or that final exam done. The medication changes can be very disruptive to one's ability to think, to sleep, to eat, to feel good, you know, and so those things can all be very disruptive. This young woman said, I ended up being out of school for a year, in and out of hospitals. I took a year off trying to emotionally get myself back together with therapy and day programs and this and that. So here I do want to caution, because unfortunately I still hear this from some people, like some young people are told you can't go to work, you can't go to school. It's just too much right now. You just have to focus on you and getting better. And I appreciate where that's coming from, but you have to remember that going to college is very age normative, and it's a great period of exploration, social, career exploration, all of the above. So telling any message to any young person that they shouldn't or couldn't go to college is damaging to their sense of identity and self-worth. I agree, maybe they shouldn't take a full course load, but if you can at least find a way to keep them engaged in one class a semester, that is going to be so much more beneficial than saying you need to take a year off. One size does not fit all, but that's just my take right there. And then this concept of executive functioning, this is a big deal. So executive functioning here, these are skills that are not taught. These are skills that we all use in our day-to-day life, and that many of us just have learned and accumulated over time. But in this recent study, this was a study at Binghamton University, and so we were screening young adults with serious mental health conditions to see if they were eligible to participate in this study. And part of the screening interview was asking them whether or not they endorsed the following challenges due to their mental health condition. And again, we're seeing 32%. I have trouble writing papers. I have trouble taking tests. I have trouble prioritizing tasks. 31%, I have difficulty organizing my stuff and keeping it organized, trouble concentrating, trouble with exams, trouble memorizing, difficulty with time management, those kinds of things. I really think, and I don't have the data, but this is back to the question of, it's not their grades. It's their ability to get their work done. It's ability to manage those stressors, and its ability to kind of function in these ways. There's something there. And here I want to just highlight again, we talked about stressful situations, but we heard a lot from young adults in this one qualitative study about just interpersonal challenges. And that includes challenges with peers and, it could be disagreements, group projects, all of those things that you encounter. But challenges communicating with professors, school staff, supervisors, and difficulty advocating, both knowing what a person needs and then being able to speak up for it. We have to remember that young people are coming from high school and a public education system that is very hierarchical, very authoritarian in terms of who has the power in the classroom and in the school. And then within a year, we're expecting these same youth to go into a college setting and to be comfortable and aware and know how to email a professor asking for an extension and know why and how you ask for that appropriately or not. They don't always know how to do that. So this communication, this advocacy is really important. Alexis, I'd love to hear you chime in on this. We've talked a little bit about it before, but tell us about your, well, actually, I should go back. You went to University of Massachusetts for undergrad, is that right?
That's right, Amherst.
Amherst, which is a pretty large school for those who don't. Yep. Okay. And then you recently went to graduate school at Boston University, right?
That's correct.
Awesome. Tell us about advocating and what that was like.
Yeah, so I want to say, like, just going up everything that you said, it was a major shift from what's it called, high school into being like I'm also a first generation graduate student, first generation college graduate as well. So it's just thinking about doing all these things for the very first time, having all these expectations placed on you, being able to feel like you cannot fail, struggling to ask for help, just all of that kind of put into one, and then being in a new area can be really, really daunting and really intimidating and just stressful. So a lot of the times, I think, especially in being in a school like UMass Amherst, where the average class size was maybe 50 to 70 students, I tended to kind of fall by the wayside, not raise my hand as much, not engage. And a lot of the times there are teachers who may not recognize that and be like, okay, maybe she's got it. She doesn't really need any help. But there are going to be the teachers once in a while who'll be like, hey, you haven't really spoken up in a while. What's going on? Or do you need help? Do you need me to like break this down for you? Or things like that. So I think it also just depends on teachers' ability to kind of gauge whether you're struggling or not. And I wouldn't bank on that, because I think for me, especially freshman year, I struggled with trying to just speak up and ask for help. But there were times where, again, if I didn't do it, or I think the saying for my parents, even thinking about this too, is a closed mouth doesn't get fed. So if I don't speak up or ask for help, no one's going to know I need it. And I think that I kind of learned that lesson the hard way freshman year. So coming around to sophomore year for me, it was like I really had to learn those skills of saying, hey, I need more time on this paper. Can I meet you for office hours and talk about this or that? Or I'm struggling with like, a family crisis right now. What can I do to kind of, put school right now to the side, but I can get back to it when I have more mental capacity. So I think just being able to kind of have someone that I can go to for that support was really important for me in my experience.
Awesome. Thank you, Alexis.
Mhm.
So building off of that, again, in the qualitative research I've done, we've heard from a lot of young people that flexibility and support are very helpful when navigating college and work in young adulthood. So what this can mean is ability to take frequent breaks. We saw many young people actually thriving in the pandemic when everything switched to online, because for some people that was more conducive to their own ability to kind of self-pace, ability to not have to be in those stressful social situations. I do some teaching as well, and I've seen some colleagues institute flexible assignment deadlines, where an assignment now is due maybe not at 11:59 p.m. on this day, but between this, they'll give a window of time. And I think many did that as part of the pandemic. I'm hoping that continues, but it's going to be, it remains to be seen. But the idea of having supportive peers, but also these adult allies and empathetic professors who also get that mental health literacy. Alexis, I think you were just starting to get into this, and I was going to ask, how were you received when you finally were able to speak up for yourself? Were you successful, and how did you get through, and who supported you?
Yeah, I think it definitely depended on the class and the teacher. For the most part, with larger classrooms where teachers didn't really get the capacity to meet with every one of their students individually, again, with sizes being so, crazy and unmanageable at times, I struggled with that. So I think professors for me was always like the first line of defense, and being able to just say like, I need help in this class right away, more immediate. But when that wasn't really working for me, my next line of defense was definitely looking out to my academic advisors, which I think we get assigned them the beginning of I think freshman year normally is how that's assigned. And then you either meet with them or you don't, but they don't really reach out to you. Luckily for me, I felt like I kind of wanted to get to know her. She was actually a woman of color, and not too many people of color were actually I'd seen on my campus. So I just kind of wanted to obviously build that rapport right away. And I'm grateful that I did, because she actually kind of became my advocate, my partner, just my support system throughout the rest of my college experience, in terms of emailing professors on my behalf. If professors didn't respond back to me, I think she would kind of double down and kind of CC them, or talk to the dean on my behalf, and just kind of like double check that they're actually following through. So yeah, I think definitely having her support made all the difference for me.
Awesome. I think you brought up a really good point. Well, it was all good points, but you're assigned an academic advisor, but whether or not you choose to meet with them, nobody is making sure that you do that. And again, I think it's another huge example of the level of self-determination that we expect young people to have going into college. And like you said, you sought her out, but I guarantee for every person that seeks them out, there's 4 more who don't. And so I think that's a really important piece of this. Goes back to that ability to advocate, that ability to say, oh, hey, you're my advisor. What are you going to help me with? What do you do? What does that mean?
Right.
So thank you. Thank you. So there's clearly formal supports available on many college campuses for people who are struggling with their mental health challenges. So first of all, a note on formal accommodations, which some young people with mental health challenges might be able to take advantage of due to the law. Essentially, if they had an IEP or a 504 plan in high school, some of those protections and additional accommodations might carry forward. But again, nobody's calling you to see if you set up your accommodation, okay? And your parents can't do it for you anymore, right? And so you, the college student, need to suddenly figure out where to go, how to figure out what the language, verbiage is, what is the form that they need. You might not know where to go. And many young people don't know fully, and maybe are just learning their mental health condition diagnosis. how is their mental health condition affecting them? So if they don't know how their mental health condition is affecting them, they don't know what to ask for. It's like, you don't know what you don't know. And as a result, many young people, if they get to these disability services or other centers, career services, what have you, and say, I need help, then the question is, so what do you need help with? I don't know. I just need help, you know? So it's really a challenge, but we also have to remember that the existence of services and supports on campus is not always enough. Okay, first of all, we know many college campuses are under-resourced when it comes to mental health services, whether that's counseling services, disability services, student services, anything like that. Again, awareness is not always up to par. In this study that we recently did at Binghamton University, which is a sizable state university in New York, some participants received this experimental intervention called HYPE. Others received what we called a control condition, where we just pointed out to them what resources were available to them on campus. And we had so many students being like, that was so helpful. They just had no idea what the services were that were out there that were built for them. But just because you build them doesn't mean they're going, young people are going to come. Alexis, wondering if you have anything to say about, did you seek out formal supports? What were your experiences in that way?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the IEP and 504, because I think that it was often stigmatized even in high school and like secondary education is like, oh, you're in a special ed class or you need certain supports. But I kind of, honestly, looking back, I kind of wish that I was more privy to that kind of thing, those kind of services in the beginning, because coming to college, I was a top performing student in high school. I never knew that there were even accommodations available. So then coming to college where it's like, okay, the mark or like the rubric to get to perform is even higher, the expectations are higher, and I don't know if that supports are available. I didn't know what I could be asking for. So all I knew about, honestly, going into college is that they had like a student counseling center where if you needed to kind of meet with the therapist, you could, but it was never like, there was never any conversation about, okay, here are academic supports and here are mental health supports, not knowing where I could even get either. But again, I kind of learned this through my academic advisor, who told me, like, if you're feeling stressed out, here's what you can do. But if you feel like you're stressed out and it's not relating mainly to academics, here's what you can go to. So that was great. I was grateful to have her. But on the same token, when I actually had visited the student counseling center, it kind of felt, I call it now like DIY therapy. So it was basically like do it yourself. I met with someone, I was in the waiting room actually for quite some time, and I met with someone, and just to note too, all of the staff were relatively women. Some of them I think were graduate students, but none of them were people of color. So I kind of just took note of that immediately and just felt a little intimidated, a little nervous to be there. But beyond that, it was a pretty quick conversation of what can we do to help you? What do you need? I'm kind of explaining to them my situations of feeling anxiety, stressed out, overwhelmed with classes. I'm the first one from my family to be in school right now, and I'm a little homesick. So all of these things kind of put together, and they kind of told me, try journaling. Here are some handouts, maybe join like a social group or go to a campus event. And I'm sitting here saying, I have friends, I'm in a couple of clubs, my family, I can call them anytime I want. So, I mean, but it was just a feeling of, I appreciate your suggestions, but I've tried them already. So to assume that I haven't, it just kind of felt a little, I don't know, infantilizing, patronizing, frustrating, all of the above. So yeah, I want to say that formal supports in my experience was kind of not individualized and not as effective as maybe having that one-on-one connection with someone who really knows me and is able to kind of be consistent with what I needed.
Yeah, that sounds really hard. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I also heard again that you don't know where to go. And just to note, this goes back to my point earlier about the way young people identify with mental health and or mental illness, is that the place that you usually go for formal accommodations on campus is often called disability services or some other terminology. And for many young people struggling with what they consider to be depression, anxiety, etc., they're not thinking, ding, 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 I have a disability. There's a bit of a stigmatizing issue there in terms of disability identity. There's a whole, another set of conversations we could be having, but they don't know what's for them and what they would be able to take advantage of. So yeah, thank you, Alexis. So I want to just try to kind of take this information and present it in a way that just kind of gives you guys some implications or lessons learned or what you can take away from here based on what we've learned from young people and Alexis's experience. I really think young people do need help managing, I'll say, day-to-day stress and anxiety. I think if the pandemic has taught us anything, well, it's taught us a lot of things, but I think it's also really thrown a whole new set of stressors and anxiety to all of us. And so I am sensitive to what Alexis was just saying, and like, yeah, breathing techniques, yeah, journaling, that type of thing. However, I think there are some basic coping strategies that young people are not taught, again, in high school. That's usually not part of, I think it's increasingly more and more a part of the curriculum, but just the concept of what is a nervous system and what does it mean when your nervous system is dysregulated, and how can you get that back? And when you're feeling the physical symptoms of an anxiety attack, what is that? And how do you manage that? I think more opportunity for peer-to-peer supports, this idea of like, you are not alone. Like oh my God, yeah, I totally had a panic attack the other day. So bringing those opportunities out, maybe a crisis plan in place, like when, thinking ahead, if this gets really bad, who am I going to call? That kind of thing. And again, I would say executive functioning skills here might prevent some of these stressful situations. So a lot of the stressors college students talk about facing, again, are in terms of deadlines, managing all the work, managing the different assignments. And if they are learning earlier on how to manage those tasks, how to chunk out those tasks into doable kind of sets of mini tasks and mini goals, how to use a calendar to focus all that, that would be so helpful. Again, strengthening interpersonal communication and advocacy skills, how to manage conflict, how to communicate with authority figures. I know in many IEP meetings in high school, we and other colleagues of mine at the Transition Center really encourage an increasing role of the student in those IEP meetings, so that over time throughout the high school years, the student is leading those meetings rather than just being a fly on the wall, because that gives them that muscle, that communication advocacy muscle that is so important. But this is important for anybody who even if they don't have an IEP meeting, the ability to advocate, again, increase knowledge of what the supports are, and support researching and outreaching to formal supports. So one thing I will say, again, about services that might exist on campus, especially often disability services, is that you might qualify for them, but you have to fill out some paperwork. And if you are a young person and you are struggling in a major bout of depression, and you started off the year feeling great, and you were like, this is the year, it's going to be great, I don't need these supports, I'm fine. And then you find yourself midterms, can't get out of bed, can't eat, all of the things. If you know to call disability services, the ability to call them, walk over there, fill out the paperwork, get in touch with your doctor, get the disability documented, though it's just hard. And so a little planning can go a long way, again, without really making a young person feel like they're going to fail. But there's no harm in having some crutches in place just in case, because then they're there. And if you find yourself needing them, you've gotten one foot in the door already. So that's a little small takeaway I've also taken over the years. I think staff, professors, faculty, advisors, everybody, I think all humans, again, in the last few years can appreciate the need to be flexible in terms of deadlines and expectations, working from home, balancing, I've got 2 young kids, all the things, our lives do not look like they used to, and our lives are continually interrupted by the pandemic. And I think if we could carry that flexibility over to some other areas of life when it comes to supporting individuals with mental health conditions, I think that would be a lovelier world. Making services low barrier, reducing the paperwork, reducing the eligibility criteria, reducing the need for all the X, Y, and Z in order to get help. And just some basic mental health literacy, understanding, and empathy. Again, I think empathy is a really important theme of the last few years that we could carry over here. So this is a little bit duplicative, but again, this comes back to the executive functioning skills. And here are some concrete ways to practice this. Young people have, electronics in their hands, but they don't always know all the ways in which they can use their calendar and the reminders function and the notes function. And how to organize for courses. How am I going to set up my digital folders? Or am I the type of person that wants a 3-ring binder and wants to print everything out? And how do I keep things color coded? And where do I keep it so that I know where I can find it when I get home tomorrow? The time management, the task management. These are skills I would love to see taught earlier and part of public education curriculum in middle school and high school. And again, sometimes we come across schools that are doing this, but it takes practice, and finding ways to support young people in doing it would be really beneficial. I'm going to go on now. I know we only have a few minutes left, but Alexis, anything to chime in on from anything I just said?
Just something small. I think, and this is also kind of going off of my experience now. I currently work at the Brookline Center for Mental Health's BRIGHT program. So I kind of help out with schools and districts that are developing school-based interventions for mental health and students that are kind of in transition, either returning from hospitalization or kind of dealing with other disruptive mental health conditions in their lives. So I think saying all that to say that it's really important, as you mentioned too, to look at supports that you can kind of give all students across the board. Like you mentioned, the help with time management, note-taking skills, things that can kind of be preventative in cases where if you give it to a student before they have a crisis, chances are the crisis is not going to be as big because they'll already have the skill in place. So I think it's just good to think about how you can offer these things to students, let them be aware of it, kind of promote these things, advertise them, put them in places and locations on campus or in the building that they're already going to be around, and see, normalizing it to, again, make students more comfortable to ask for help and things like that will definitely go a long way in terms of how to de-escalate situations that, you know, could kind of be prevented. So just something to think about.
A little quote unquote prevention, but honestly, prevention sometimes it's just knowledge, right? I mean, knowledge in and of itself, how to do these things. Again, what is this a nervous system? What does it mean when your nervous system's deregulated? How do I, you know, it's just so empowering. So I agree. Alexis, thank you so much. So I just wanted to share a few resources. So at our transition center, we have a few models that we are developing and or piloting that could be helpful for supporting college students with mental health conditions. The first is this project called PASS. It's a peer academic coaching model that we've been testing at Boston University and UMass Boston right now. And so this is where we have peer coaches, which are usually upperclassmen between the ages of 18 to 25, who are supporting and coaching underclassmen with mental health conditions, but the coaching is primarily focused on the academic supports. Okay, so this is not counseling, this is not clinical supports, this is not diagnostic, this is, hey, I'll go to the bookstore with you. Let's go to the bookstore and figure out where are those books that you need. Or, hey, let me show you how I organize my materials. Or this is how I, you know, let's take a look at your calendar. How are you using your calendar? How are you not using it? So again, I think there's a lot of power in a peer-to-peer support system. And we have some promising preliminary results. Generally speaking, those in a small randomized control trial, those who were in the past condition improved more over time than those in the control condition, or sustained the improvement for longer in areas of resilience, general self-efficacy, this ability and belief that you can do it, and internalized stigma, so reducing stigma. So we're pretty buoyed by that, and we have a larger randomized control trial happening. And then I mentioned this study at Binghamton University. This is testing out HYPE on campus, which is a blended kind of supported education model for college students. And in this study, we trained MSW interns to be these HYPE practitioners that provided one-on-one support, individualized support over a semester or two, meeting 1 or 2 times a week with a student. That included some executive functioning skill development, but also, you know, support around what's happening in their life, how it's impacting their academics, ways in which they can support them. This clinical trial is underway, so I don't have any data, but I will say this executive functioning curriculum has been used in other studies, and publications are pending that show some positive benefits and improvements in the reduction of academic disruptions for students who are exposed to this executive functioning curriculum. And then my center also has several different resources that are available. And I wanted to highlight this group of videos that was released earlier this year. This is actually a product of that past study, based on interviews with college faculty members, staff, and students, a suite of videos to support faculty in better supporting the academic needs of college students with mental health conditions. Students often indicate that faculty mental health training would be the most important thing that they think is needed. And they feel that often faculty don't understand what the mental health condition is, how it impacts them. Unfortunately, there's some faculty who think it's being used as an excuse. It's common for people to just, this suck it up, pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of mentality is still very prevalent. And so these videos are really well done, and they are narrated by me in some places, so you might recognize my voice as well. And we have some wonderful tip sheets, accommodations, but also outside the box accommodations. So things like housing accommodations, bringing your support and your therapy support animal to college. How can you do that? You can. We've supported many people in doing that. So some resources for you there. And in closing, I'll just say that the reason this is so important is that early career exploration and education is so pivotal to long-term career trajectory. And we know, and David, this colleague of mine who's here, and others who've been doing this work, we know that the economic outcomes and the career trajectory outcomes for adults with mental illness are not always so great. And there is a very large population of individuals with mental illness who get very reliant on Social Security and other benefits. And if we can support people to more early in their career trajectory and support them in getting that education, I think we're really doing a favor for so many lives and the broader society as a whole. So that's about it. Alexis, any final words from you?
Nothing more. I just want to say thanks so much, everyone, for being open and hearing our conversation and just hearing my experience. I think that this definitely affects a lot more people than we think. So again, just thinking about that.
Thank you. I'm sorry we ran a little late. Was there any burning questions from the chat, Jackie?
No worries. First of all, thank you both so much. We had multiple questions going in or coming in, but naturally you answered quite a few as you went through. So I really appreciate your thoroughness in this. And I really appreciate everyone who is in the chat today, sharing their experiences, sharing their knowledge, and really being present for this past hour. I know so much of what Catherine and Alexis both shared resonated with me and will be so helpful to so many people out there. Just a few last reminders. I know that there were a few comments in there about, getting resources to kids earlier and how do we support younger kids. At MHA, our Back to School campaign is starting next week, actually. So our Back to School toolkit will be available Monday, the 22nd for download. That has tons of resources on K through 12 mental health. And we will be having a series of webinars starting focusing on that K-12 population coming up in the end of August here and throughout September. So please join us for those as again, you will be sent the follow-up materials. So that will include the link to these slides. I know a lot of you were asking about that today. We'll make sure we get you these slides. We'll also include in there some of those awesome resources that were shared at the end. And then it'll also have that link to request your certificate of attendance and the recording from today. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Catherine, for your wonderful expertise shared, and Alexis for yours as well, and your personal experiences you were able to share with us, which I know even I connected to many of those things that you were talking about that our college students are going through, and a lot of people in the chat were resonating with. So thank you both, and thank you everyone for joining us here today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye.